Hello and welcome. In this Emotion Matters in HE podcast, we'll be focusing on gratitude in university learning and teaching. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Ippolito, and I'm really pleased to be talking with my colleague, Dr. Giskin, Principal Teaching Fellow in the Faculty of Medicine. We hope that our conversation, based on Giskin's research and our experiences of teaching in university, will enable you to gain new perspectives and extended understanding of how we can think about gratitude beyond the obvious, and also ideas for how to cultivate cultures of gratitude in our educational contexts. So, Giskin, please get us started by explaining what is gratitude.
Thank you, Kate. My favourite definition of gratitude is probably from the sociologist George Simmel, and he described gratitude as the moral memory of mankind. But there's actually no consensus on whether gratitude is primarily a moral quality or whether it resides in interpersonal relationships. And I like to think of gratitude exchanges as micro-ethical bursts of shared humanity. But what's gratitude to you, Kate?
I suppose for me, in simple terms, it's about indicating an appreciation of the effort or contribution that another person has made. When I show my gratitude, I'm often thanking someone for helping me in some way. I think it's a very interesting concept for framing interactions and expectations in contemporary higher education, possibly because we might assume, rightly or wrongly, that there's a lack of gratitude. And this can create a really strong emotional response. And I suppose perhaps those listening could recall a time now when they felt gratitude and maybe another time when they perceived an absence of gratitude. And then later in the podcast, we'll think about what might characterise these situations. I'm aware that gratitude was the focus of your PhD, Giskin. What made you interested in studying this emotion in the first place?
Well, I became interested in studying gratitude because of the crisis of morale in the NHS. I teach medical students, and I do worry about the ambivalence they express about entering a profession for which they've spent years invested in training. So I started off wanting to explore how to make hospital environments more hospitable, as it were, to gratitude, because it struck me that there was a lot of emphasis on complaining. You know, often you walk into a hospital and there's a big banner telling you how to complain.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes complaints are seen as the only means of driving change. And gratitude is a form of feedback. It tells you what's working and what you're doing well. But as we speak, there's just been another damning report into toxic culture in the NHS. I'm not saying that we should feel gratitude no matter what, or that it's always warranted. But I do think that workplaces in which people feel appreciated are far more likely to foster positive work cultures. So I would like to see gratitude taken more seriously as a useful form of feedback.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's come back to think about gratitude as a form of feedback within our university environments later on. For now, please can you tell us what you would say are the links between your research on gratitude and hospitals and how it relates to education?
Yes, well, one of the first questions we can ask is, well, what is the place of gratitude in any service industry?
Yeah.
In education as well as in healthcare, people are paid to do a job. Does that mean that people should feel grateful for a service to which they're entitled and have paid for directly or through taxes? Of course it doesn't. No one should feel obliged to feel grateful. But people often do want to express gratitude. It's important to them. And that gratitude is often for something quite specific, not just for people doing their jobs. So what people are grateful for, what we sometimes refer to as the thankable, it's useful feedback on what's going right. And if we assume that we can only base change on what people complain about, we tend to organize our feedback systems around complaining, and that tends to crowd out feedback on what's gone well or what people have appreciated. So exchanges of gratitude in work contexts are important markers of mutual goodwill and respect. And as long as gratitude is not felt to be obligatory, it's a sincere response to good intentions and a recognition that care, or in the context of education, teaching, has been offered with warmth and humanity.
Yes, I think we could do more to share students' and colleagues' recognition of good intentions and care in the context of teaching and supporting learning. I think that sometimes the assessment and evaluation systems that we put in place, they can serve to filter out positive, motivating gratitude in the form of feedback. For example, do supervisors always see students' appreciation of theirs and their colleagues' support in the acknowledgement section at the beginning of their dissertations? I do love reading those. And do individual tutors see the feedback from students that's gathered at a module level? I think often they don't. And this is especially problematic when students think that they've expressed their gratitude, but it may not have been received by the intended party. And you're making me wonder now whether we ever prioritise values such as anonymity and impartiality at the expense of exchanges of gratitude and appreciation. And I'm sure we do all over the place.
Yes, well, anonymity does add a lack of personalisation, and that slightly degrades a communicative relationship. But I think those policies are put in place for good reasons to try and avoid bias. But I think people do often assume that gratitude will reach the person for whom it was intended, and the mechanisms for feedback don't always ensure that this is the case. And we can all learn to give better feedback by naming individuals to whom we feel thankful and perhaps following up in other ways, such as sending an email when a course is finished, when there can be no suspicion of ulterior motives.
Yeah. On that note, do you think we ever need to be concerned that gratitude is motivated by a desire for special treatment?
Yes, it certainly does have ethical implications, and it should never, ever serve as a bribe. And most social theories that intersect with gratitude focus on the maximizing of self-interest. In other words, we gain some sort of return from expressing our gratitude, be it a compensatory offer or an accrual of social capital. But it's why we often talk of owing gratitude or gratitude being due. But the debtor paradigm suggests a sort of moral bookkeeping, and that seems to me to be antithetical to the generosity that infuses authentic gratitude. And for that reason, my research has sought to reorientate gratitude away from thinking of it as transactional to thinking of it as relational. So gratitude as a social emotion produced in interaction might also be an individual psychological state. But what we are feeling often has fewer consequences for a situation than what we're actually doing. So I do think we need to be concerned that gratitude does have ulterior motives, but so often that is not the case. So I don't think we should ever assume that all gratitude is just self-interested.
No, I would say from my experience that's true. So I suppose based on what you say, there's something about university teachers needing to be aware of how they feel about an expression of gratitude by their students, and then to separate that out from the action they take, for example, when they're in the role of assessor. And I really like the idea of gratitude as relational and as a social emotion. I think that gratitude is an important emotional signal for building rapport, actually, between teachers and students, and that a lack of gratitude, maybe even withheld gratitude, is problematic for pedagogic relationships. I suppose I'm thinking of the time and effort that I put into giving feedback, that if I could admit it, I like to see acknowledged in some way. A thank you goes a long way after a big pile of marking. I know that you're interested in how we distinguish gratitude from merely being polite. And so if, for example, a learner says thank you to you as a teacher as they leave the room after teaching, does that count as gratitude, or is that just politeness?
I mean, that's a crucial distinction, isn't it? So we most often recognise gratitude through thanking practices, but we often thank people as a politeness routine, not necessarily because we are actually feeling that emotion of gratitude. But if we come to think of gratitude as enacted, it matters less what the underlying emotional state is. What's important is what thanking does, rather than what it reflects. And as a social action, it entails gratitude as an ethic of care. So thanking somebody for their teaching session is indeed a mark of civility that involves a thanking practice. But for it to be received as an emotional act and to gratitude rather than politeness, I think we would possibly expect to see some additional intensification markers to signal that we intend the recipient of our thanks to interpret our words as gratitude. So my research found that people often repeated their thanks until they received some sort of acknowledgement that their thanking had been received. And that doesn't tend to happen when thanking is just a politeness routine.
Okay, an interesting distinction. So it's important for those expressing gratitude to know it's been received. And that makes me think then that it's a problem when a student signals gratitude with some intensity, and this is in turn not acknowledged, which might be the case in our mass higher education systems. And they might stop doing it in a higher education system that doesn't seem to recognise or respond to their expression of gratitude. I suppose that's the risk that we face.
Yes, exactly. In discourse analysis, it's called a receipt. The language of economics, again, is fairly inescapable. Yeah. But an emotive speech act of any kind, be it distress, outrage, gratitude, we do need acknowledgement. It sort of continues the aspects of caring for which gratitude has been invoked as a response.
And so what's the difference then between a thank you that's performative and a thank you that's authentic? And does it actually matter?
I don't think we need to worry too much about the distinction between performance and authenticity. Teaching is a performative act, but it doesn't mean that we're sacrificing our authenticity. It's not a play-off between the two, and gratitude is often both performative and authentic.
Yeah, I suppose when I make my expressions of gratitude more authentic, it's when I say thank you and then I add the action that's been helpful to me. So, for example, thanks for your feedback. It was really motivating and it helped me to think about how to structure supervision in the future. So it's clear to the person showing me gratitude that I in turn appreciate that message, that feedback that they've given me. And I do that partly because I want to encourage people to keep giving helpful feedback. I want that flow of feedback to continue, if you like. There was something quite striking through my PhD research, and that was a conversation about the impact of applause for the teacher. So after a session, students might applaud, and that was seen as a motivator for the teacher and also a form of feedback on the effectiveness of the session. I don't know if you've ever felt that warmth of getting a round of applause, especially when you don't expect it, but it is really lovely.
It is really lovely, yes. And I bet the students felt strongly that they'd like to express that appreciation. So another finding from my PhD was that people look for gratitude opportunities to take up. And we could do more to create those opportunities in education. So when you finish a talk, say, with immediately saying any questions, you don't leave that pause for students to express their appreciation should they want to. And I think we often don't even think about that. But also another example is one of the best parts of attending a graduation ceremony is when the students have the chance to applaud their families and supporters. And that opportunity really generates joy. So I think people often need to express their gratitude and feel somewhat denied if we don't create those pauses or those opportunities for them to do that.
Yeah, and at graduation there's a really clear invitation, isn't there, for everyone to express gratitude to family and to the lecturing staff and so on. Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought about it like that. So changing tack slightly, is there anything that we need to be cautious about in the realm of gratitude? For example, gratitude and reflecting on what we're grateful for has been heralded as a mental health game changer. Do you think it lives up to the hype?
Well, certainly there's a lot of evidence that exercises like counting your blessings and keeping a gratitude journal, they do help people focus on the positive in their lives, and that definitely can improve mental health. There are a few worrying aspects about this trend, though. The first is that gratitude is used as a substitute for fixing conditions that contribute to poor mental health in the first place.
Sure.
So it's a bit like the backlash now that we're having against the concept of resilience.
Yeah.
And I do think we need to resist attributing issues to personal failing. So you aren't grateful enough or you're not resilient enough, rather than the conditions that lead to stress in the first place. And a second problem is that one has to guard against gratitude being instrumentalized as what I like to think of as making your soul safe for capitalism. I've been dismayed at the commodification of gratitude. You actually don't need an expensive gratitude journal or a subscription to an app to practice gratitude. It's actually free and far more meaningful. Instead of keeping it to yourself, you tell the people to whom you are grateful.
Yeah. So we could usefully think about how to collectively cultivate cultures of gratitude between us, couldn't we, as an alternative to locating the need for instrumental gratitude in the individual. And as we draw our conversation to a close, Giskin, do you have any thoughts or suggestions about how we can create these opportunities for expressing gratitude in higher education? Where can we find these spaces and create these invitations?
Well, I think something you said earlier was really important, Kate, and that's that you can specify the thankable. So by adding to our thanks what we are grateful for, it adds to the usefulness of gratitude and it makes it actionable. So that it then becomes a form of feedback, and that's really useful to do. I think also how we word requests for feedback, we need a balance of what went right and what went wrong. Too often we're just focusing on what the issues were rather than things that really worked well in a situation. And that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. It's about paying attention sometimes, isn't it, to what went well. I think often as teachers and teaching teams, we fixate on what we could do better rather than taking notice of where students or colleagues are actually appreciating what worked well and what they'd like us to continue to do.
Yeah. I think attending to the flow of gratitude is also very important, making sure that gratitude reaches the people for whom it's intended. So if students have thanked an individual, say, in a module evaluation questionnaire, it's important that that thanks is passed on to that person. And it never hurts to copy in their line manager as well.
That's true.
Just so that we make gratitude more visible in these kind of systems.
Yeah, and when you talk about flow, it makes me think about the reciprocal social emotion that this creates and how that helps to build connection between students and teachers. It's invisible, but it's very important, I would say,
true, yeah.
especially in our mass higher education systems that can feel quite impersonal for both sides.
Well, that's right, yes. And something that's just occurred to me now is that we've got a very good system here at Imperial for nominating colleagues for awards.
Yeah.
And often people don't want to tell people that they've been nominated for fear of disappointment if they don't get the award. But of course, it's just absolutely lovely to know that you've been nominated.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to think more carefully about that. So I think if you are nominating somebody, do send them your nomination and their citation. And even if they're not successful, it'll still give them a really warm feeling that they feel appreciated by their colleagues.
Exactly. And I'm just thinking as you speak, that's one of the real upsides of putting together a promotion application or a fellowship application, is that you need to gather some evidence of impact. And in doing that, you actually realise that things you did were recognised and appreciated beyond what you could have known before. So,
Yes.
yeah, we should encourage that flow of information all the more. I've started to pass student or colleague gratitude onto the relevant teacher, as you suggest, and to let others know why and how their feedback is useful to me. And I suppose in that way, I'm showing my authentic gratitude to them. I'm
Yes.
modelling, in a sense, what that can look like. I hadn't thought of it like that before. And on that note, I'd like to thank you, Giskin, for sharing insights from your research and your experience, and also drawing out strategies for cultivating gratitude in our higher education context. If you want to know more, do please look at Giskin's work via the links on the webpage. And thank you also to listeners, and please do listen again. Thank you. Goodbye.